we are looking for those specific patterns that often go unnoticed. So Karen used that analogy of the currents from a river analogy. And I've done whitewater kayaking. And yeah, I learned the hard way. What you see on the surface ain't the same thing going on underneath the surface.
Yeah,
my kayak flipped over.
I know.
Hello, and welcome to the Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. I'm Christina Caro, licensed clinical psychologist.
And I'm Karen Linsky, leadership and self-trust coach.
So today, Karen, we're finishing up our exploration of humble inquiry. That's Edgar Schein's work. Today, we're going to be diving into the last form of inquiry, which he called process-oriented inquiry. And as I mentioned in a past episode, this is really one of the most challenging and the most difficult inquiry skill, but I do think it's also one of the most powerful.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So we've been doing inquiry in the other episodes. Inquiry has been about trying to find ways to get information from another person instead of telling. We invite people to share their knowledge, their insights, their feelings. But what process-oriented is about isn't about that content. It's about what is happening between us as we are relating. So it is what's beneath the surface of the conversation. And sometimes that can be one of the most important things to understand how a relationship is unfolding before us, or how a team is actually working together. It's by understanding how we are interacting together and bringing that curiosity to that how.
And, I'm so excited to unpack this with you today because I think it's so important, especially in today's workspace. And I think it's that ability to also share some practical tools as listeners that you can start using right away. But before we start, I get to ask you to please consider giving a thumbs up. And if you'd like to help us reach more people, consider subscribing, sharing a comment, and sharing it with one or two or more of your friends. So let me start really quickly with a recap of why we started this series way back when, because we want to continue our exploration of trust in meaningful connections. Now, I'm going to start with an example that we used in the last podcast I really, really liked, which was, I want you to all think about a time that you experienced someone giving you unwanted advice when you just wanted to be heard, where that person wanted to fix the problem. And they did that by telling you what to do, how to think, how to feel. Now, we call this telling rather than asking. And so what's interesting about this is by telling, and I didn't know this till we explored this more and more, by telling, you actually are unknowingly creating a subtle power dynamic where you're actually positioning yourself as an expert. Now, think about it. That telling assumes that we know better, and we're positioning ourselves that we know better than the other person does. And just automatically, right? Yeah. They actually tend to resist that advice we think should help them. So I think that's the one thing we wanted to share with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when we switch to inquiry, we put our ego aside and adopt more that beginner's mind. And we create space for curiosity and to invite the person to share more, share what's beneath the surface. And in process-oriented inquiry, we actually go a step further. Okay, we're introducing this concept of meta-awareness. So that's awareness of awareness. And it's simultaneously listening to the information while also being observant about how we are interacting together. And it allows us to discover the unseen or the invisible tension that might be present in an interpersonal dynamic that tends to not come out when we are just in telling mode. When we're in telling mode, it's like from me to you. It's like from my expertise that I'm dumping into your head. I'm not really paying attention to what's happening between us. Or when someone is doing some telling to me. If I only focus on the content, I miss different shenanigans, different things that's going on, that it's really much more enlightening and can actually transform the conversation if we pay attention to it. So it is really, really challenging. It's difficult, but it is worth cultivating the skill to be able to do this.
I love the word shenanigans because that's so true. It's like the shenanigans. I love that. So there's an analogy that I really was thinking about. It's like the difference between looking at the surface of water in a river versus understanding the currents that's moving the water. So let me just ask you so that we can all be on the same page. I know you can give the best definition. So how do you actually define process inquiry?
So it is observing the process, but why we say it's process-oriented inquiry is we're still bringing that curiosity and questioning forward. So most conversations are focused on information giving and receiving. Okay, that's what I call content, the content information. It's what we're talking about. Whereas process inquiry focuses, like I said, on the how we're interacting. What is the attitude of the person? What is the tone conveying about how they're feeling right now or their mood? How are biases influencing their perception? How are assumptions arising and maybe creating misunderstandings? How are we using our body language? You know, are we doing this? We're crossing our arms when we're talking, scowling face. How is power being avoided or exercised? How is authority being shared or is it being hoarded? So you can see, like, that's not content. That's about dynamics. That's about how we interact with each other. And so what we're doing is we're simultaneously having to listen to content, but we're just also keeping awareness of the dynamics that are occurring in the moment.
Yeah, so let me give you examples that I've come up with in the workplace. Like, did you ever notice when someone talks about their team, but then all of a sudden there's like an energy shift when you're describing how the team's working or something? And I would say, I noticed when you talked about the team or John, you just kind of had an energy shift and your shoulders actually went in. So what's happening here? What's going on, right? Or I would even say sometimes, hey guys, let's pause for a moment. I'm just curious because all of a sudden we were focused on exploring options and then all of a sudden we moved to actions like this. Like, did we finish exploring the options? What's going on here really? And it's just so interesting about that because I like process because it's about noticing patterns in the conversation itself that's underneath the surface.
Yeah, and the skill when we're doing inquiry, it's about, and we'll get into the skills a little bit later, but when you notice the process, what Karen's examples that she just did, you'll notice that she just gently touches into the dynamic, brings the awareness over to the dynamic. And I do this a lot, especially with couples work, because with couples, it's really critical to understand like all the stuff underneath it. Like, I'll have some couples who are in conflict, right? And I've been working with one of my clients on getting a little bit better on using this inquiry mode. And so he'll try. And then what he notices is that his wife, rather than responding to his inquiry, will do like a whataboutism. You know, instead of answering, she'll be like, well, what about you? Da, 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 da. Or she'll come back with a criticism. She'll come back with a personal attack. Now, what happens is he could get hooked by the content. So this is what I talk to people about. Notice when you're getting hooked by content, think of it as a shiny object, and now you're off chasing the shiny object. But if you can just take that step back and notice, oh, she didn't answer. Wait a minute, she just changed the topic. Instead of going after whatever the content of the criticism was, you bring attention and inquiry to the shift. Like, hold on a minute, you didn't answer my question. Like, what's going on? Or wait a minute, okay, we can talk about that thing with me you're upset about, but I noticed you're trying to change the subject. This is a little bit involved with what I call nailing Jello to the wall.
Oh, I love that. That's funny.
When you do this, when you put your contact, your engagement with the process. When someone's trying to take it off to the side and you're like, zip, nope, let me just nail that jello to the wall. I'm going to bring my laser focus now to that process. One of two things happen. One, they try to squirm out of it for a couple more tries, and then you just keep bringing your attention into the squirming. But sometimes when you do it with the right tone, a tone of compassion, a tone of genuine inquiry, it can actually slow things down. The person may not even know they're in some habit of avoidance, and it can allow them to notice their own behavior, and maybe there's an intervention right there and you can get back on track. So tone is absolutely crucial with process inquiry. It has to be curious, it needs to be gentle, it needs to be observational and not judgmental or directive.
And I could imagine, because I know this, I don't even imagine, I know that the wrong tone makes me feel analyzed or criticized, which I think majority of us would feel that way if you have the wrong tone.
Right. So here's the difference of tone, right? I could say, hey, hold on a second. Like I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from. And you just went off now on a whole different topic. What's going on? Like, are you not comfortable with that? Okay, I'm genuinely curious. Or I could say, oh, so what? Are you changing the topic because you're uncomfortable? Like I could have this really snarky tone or just be an a-hole. So it's not going to be effective that way. You have to be really genuine about that tone. So I think of myself as a curious observer or like an anthropologist. I have my anthropologist hat on, and I'm just observing, say, a foreign culture where there's different language, different customs. And instead of feeling like it should be a certain way, by having that anthropologist hat on, it's just like, oh, that's different. I wonder why that's the response. I can be genuinely curious when I put on my anthropologist hat.
You talked about tone being important. So tell me some more about how exactly we should deliver these process questions. You just gave a great 2 examples of the differences when you show up. And it was so great when you showed up because you're even like, your body was giving me a very different vibe too, not just what you're saying, but your whole body was intricate to the tone. So talk a little bit more about this.
Yeah, folks, it really requires having some impulse control, recognizing when you're getting triggered and going into your own lizard brain and being more emotionally reactive, because it's really, really difficult to stay grounded and be in that curiosity. Say the person is deflecting whatever you're trying to understand better, and they're using criticism to distract. So you could get hooked in content and now start defending yourself because you got hooked, or you just notice, oh, you switched and now you're trying to criticize me. Can we just get back to answering that first question? I have to be grounded. I really have to be in my belly and not getting into hyper vigilance or not getting that. You'll notice if your shoulders might be getting tense. Like you really have to be aware of what's going on in your body. And then the facial expressions, you have to really genuinely come from a grounded place, because we're not making these facial expressions on purpose. It is just the signals that the brain sends out. So if you're annoyed, that's going to come out in your face. So you have to stop first, get grounded in your body. Am I tense? Am I starting to roll my shoulders forward, or am I crossing my arms? It's really important when you are doing inquiry to do your best to relax, to unclench, to have a more open posture, maybe even, lean forward like, so everything is conveying, I'm really trying to understand you. And because of my autism, I have to do this quite a bit, because there's a lot of times people are expecting me to make assumptions, which I really rarely do because I don't know how to do that. And so I have to ask a lot of questions. So I've trained myself to be in that inquiry place, to know that I need to ask usually 3 questions before I even know what the heck's going on. And I have really strengthened my curiosity since learning about the autism. So I think for me, it comes really naturally. But I know watching all of my clients, especially the neurotypicals, where your brains are wired to make quick assumptions of threat assessing, there's a lot of body language that can happen, that tensing up or the shoulders going up or shutting down, looking kind of shut down, looking away, eye rolling, head shaking, all of those things, they're not conducive to doing really effective inquiry.
And I think what's interesting when you're talking about the curiosity, I think for me, just being curious is so important, right? And I loved how you, just by leaning in, says, I care what you have to say. I'm just so curious. And I think that's what's important, is realize that you want to switch to a curiosity, that you really want to hear more. So let's
And it should be slower too. One of the things I don't know if y'all noticed is when we tell, we tend to be rapid firing out the information because we want to just get all that information out. But when we do inquiry and you're in genuine curiosity, you should be coming from that place where you're not sure you understand. So it does slow down your communication. Like, wait, hold on a second. Matter of fact, that's even a pocket phrase, is just, okay, wait, hold on a second. I'm inviting the person to pause. I'm needing to pause.
Yeah.
I'm like, let me think about this. So you're saying blah, blah. Do I understand correctly? So that's content inquiry. But if I'm noticing shenanigans, I'm going to be really slow because I'm cautious.
Yeah.
When I see shenanigans, that tells me tension is going on in the other person.
Mm-hmm.
If there is avoidance, if there is deflection, if there is distraction, counterattack, what I know in my mind is that person's stress level is starting to escalate. So it's really important for me, if I want this to be productive, I'm observing that dynamic happening, to start slowing things down, to de-escalate. But it comes from a place of, you can come from that place of compassion, as this person is getting triggered. So how can I step back from being whatever's happening that's making them feel threatened? So I have to slow down to do that.
So it's interesting when you're saying the pause. So a typical sentence stem, which is like this phrase that I give to my clients that I also use at work as well, is something like, I wonder if we could pause for a moment.
Yeah.
And look what's happening. And it's just a gentle way. I wonder. And then that's that curiosity question. And then also just to use the other words, like, I'm noticing something right now, and I'm curious about, because again, that's invite that. Like when you say curious, I wonder if we could pause. Those are words directly associated with curiosity. And that's what I share with my clients. And I think I like it because automatically those words create safety for that person, because I'm interested in asking you of what you think. And I think when people get asked that question of what you think, they get excited, right? Like someone cares about what I think. And so that's why I love that, because again, these sound gentle and not threatening.
Yeah. And I do think that that's probably easier to achieve that goal in a work environment, because, you're a team, but in some sense, like where I am doing this work, particularly with couples, it's way more intense, right? There's a lot more at stake. This is my spouse. This is my partner. I live with this person and we have all this conflict going on. So creating safety is so critical. So yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, we are looking for those specific patterns that often go unnoticed. So Karen used that analogy of the currents from a river analogy. And I've done whitewater kayaking, and yeah, I learned the hard way. What you see on the surface ain't the same thing going on underneath the surface. As my kayak flipped over.
I know. Happens with me with kayaking too, And I think one of the thing is that one of the most obvious currents that I feel like I'm lucky to be able to read is kind of like this energy shift, and you brought this up earlier, when they sit up, they look away, they cross their arms, they speak faster or slower. There's that signal that something important is happening below the surface. Like, so I spoke earlier when you say, I noticed when we talked about your team, and it could be even that their voice got quieter. And then so I would ask, so what happens for you when we discuss the team? And that just opens it up, because it's just funny, but I feel like we can see more energy shifts than we tend to give ourselves credit for.
Yes. I think that's a really good point. You're right, because I have had so many people tell me like their gut or their intuition, they were picking something
Exactly.
up, but they don't trust it. A lot of times they don't trust it. But see, they don't trust it because they feel like they have to act on it. And what we're saying is, no, use that as a cue and just be curious, test your hypothesis.
Exactly.
Use
Exactly.
You can be wrong. It's okay to be wrong. You think you see something and you ask about it. I think we're going to give an example a little bit later, and it could be completely wrong. And you could be like, oh, okay, I misunderstood. Like, thank you for sharing,
So true. I think the word energy is also make me think when I think of energy, it's just woo woo, but energy, it's woo woo means spiritual, woo hoo, energy shifts. Oh my gosh, but it's that whole thing. That's in the gut thing. You're noticing these things, the voice, the posture. So,
yeah. So some tips. You're listening when you're doing process-oriented observation. You're noticing voice, posture, breathing changes. You're noticing movement, changes in speed. You're noticing the emotional temperature, if it's shifting in the room. You might notice a topic is, like I said, getting deflected or avoided, or maybe the shenanigan is to redirect it as a personal attack, or even notice if certain people or problems are never getting discussed directly, if there's avoidance going on. And you could say something like, I notice that whenever we get close to talking about your goals, we end up talking about daily tasks instead. And I'm curious about what's making you avoid that bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. And in the workplace, I've worked with a senior leader who's so frustrated because the meetings are always running overtime and no decisions are made with this one team. It's getting really frustrated. And I said to her, maybe you could do something like this. I noticed that whenever we get close to a decision point, someone brings up a new consideration. I mean, we're getting close to the decision point. So I'm curious about what's making conclusions or decisions feel unsafe in this group. And
you know what, Karen, I might even modify that, right? Because you are making an assumption that it's coming out of that feeling.
That's true.
Safe.
That's true.
So I might be even more generic and say, I might even say, did anybody else notice that? And then invite them.
That's a great one.
Yeah, what are your thoughts? Because maybe someone is, this is where you start seeing all the body language. People start looking down and like, don't put the spotlight on me.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's the point I want to make too, that it's important that you don't need like a consultant outside to do this, right? You as a member of the team or the team leader, it's really important that you ask these process questions. Mm-hmm. Because then imagine, like I've been teaching people how much more productive meetings can be if we could just be courageous enough to ask these process questions. And another current, I'm called current, is pace changes. So when conversations speed up or slow down, you could say something like, I'm noticing that we're moving the agenda efficiently until this point. And now we seem to be spending a lot more time on the details. What makes this area need more attention? And again, it's not right or wrong words. It's more of just noticing the difference, the shift, right? And deciding that in your gut, you want to bring this up because you feel like something else is happening. And the reason why Christina said earlier when she first started was that these observations, this is why they're hard, I believe, because they're happening in real time during the conversations, right? So you got to get practice to notice things and then, again, have the courage to ask. But the more you can just ask that question, I'm curious, I'm wondering, those type of questions, it does help it. And that's the beauty of process inquiry. It brings out awareness. And when you ask that question, it immediately creates an opportunity for that change. And then what I like about them is once people see the pattern, they often naturally just shifts to it because you just bring that awareness.
Folks, I just want to do some expectation setting. First of all, I have actual training this. I was introduced to it in graduate school where I had a whole course on how to do go from content to process. I took an entire year of process-oriented Gestalt therapy. I took another whole year of process-oriented psychodrama, and then I took a whole year of process-oriented trauma training. So this is something that it does help to have, get the book because the book is excellent, and then practice it because it is a skill. And it is so helpful. We can really do it all the time. This is something, although, yes, I took all these courses and I got a lot of training, anybody can start. You can watch other people. You could go to a coffee shop and kind of watch people, notice how they're talking to each other. And just be curious. Like, what questions would you ask as you listen to that conversation? There's just, you can really play with this.
I like that, because I think the thing is, like, I had a whole master's degree in organizational development, which is a lot of this process inquiry question. So I totally agree with you. And I think it's always about, like, what Christine and I talk all the time about, curiosity. But if you were to give like 3 steps or 4 steps about, some simple things that they could begin with, add some more on to what you just talked about.
Okay, besides get the book Humble Inquiry, and we will put a link in the show notes below. Honestly, if you have ever heard of mindfulness meditation, you can Google 5-minute mindfulness practice and you can get some guided meditation, or if you have the Calms app, starting to do 5 to 7 minutes of mindfulness practice, which is you usually have your eyes closed and you pay attention to your breathing. And then as thoughts come up, instead of getting hooked by the content of your thought, you just notice the process of thinking. Oh, I'm thinking. Oh, I'm moving around. I'm uncomfortable. And then you bring your attention back to breathing, because mindfulness meditation is the practice of going from content to process, content to process, content to process. So it is one of the best ways that you can start developing that muscle of meta awareness. And then,
oh, I love that one.
And
I
then,
do. That's good. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And then, like I said, then practice it in your own family. Just be an observer and notice what people are talking about, the content, and then switch your attention to how they're talking to each other. Okay. It'll be easier first to watch outside of yourself. Okay. Then the next step will be starting to notice yourself in a conversation. What is the content? And then trying to be like, how are we talking to each other? So these are really small practices. Now, the next step would be, how do I now go from just my observation to engaging with the process? So the key to this is, initially it should be gentle and actually try to use very few words. So you can say the noticing part first, like, ooh, I noticed your shoulders went up. I noticed that you just switched the topic. So that's the first statement, is the noticing. Sometimes I'll just make contact with it. Say I see a person, we're talking about something and it's hard and I'm starting to see struggle. I might just say, it's hard. That's it. I'll just touch into it. But because I'm not yet asking the question, I give a little space before I ask a question. When I just make that contact, what I'm observing, like, oh, it's hard, the person just feels the experience of it, and they go deeper into it before you ask the question. And then if you say, hey, what's happening? You've given them that little moment, because you just touched into struggle, for them to feel the struggle, to become more aware of struggle. They might actually have some awareness because you made that gentle touch into the experience, the touch into the observation. And then you have those curious, gentle question, what's happening right now? Or I might start with my own experience. And this is really a good practice, is to say, I notice that I'm feeling really uncomfortable bringing this up. So you're role modeling now, bringing awareness to the process. Or you might say, gosh, I find myself wanting to avoid that question. I'm not talking about content, but I'm talking about how I'm feeling or how I'm reacting. Those are just some examples of how to really start with first the mindfulness practice, then observing other people, then imagining what questions would I ask if I did an inquiry, and then start practicing the inquiry questions. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and I would ask you, especially those who are new, because you're new to noticing these undercurrent patterns, focus on just practicing noticing. Like for a whole week. Don't just go right and notice, comment, notice, because I would do that. Like, okay, I noticed it. Let me just practice the next part. So just so anxious to learn so quickly. But noticing itself, because I love what you said earlier about just noticing when we do the meditation, because that's why I said, oh my gosh, that's so great. I never thought about the connection between the two, because then I'm noticing myself. And it's interesting also, it's when you're looking to a family dynamic, it's a lot easier watching your family dynamic between two other people, not necessarily about you and that other person, right? Like you're looking at it from not with me. So notice those type of things. And I think that's what's so cool. This builds that muscle of observation. And that's what's so key. And then you'll also start to see real patterns, not just one-time occurrences. Because again, it's patterns. We're not talking about, oh, one time she sees this. Like you're trying to notice a pattern. And that's the gift of process inquiry.
Exactly. This isn't, I mean, it is a technique, but I consider it more of a practice, because it's something that we can really be doing and practicing and refining and gaining mastery of over time. So it's really more of a competency than a technique if you put the time into practicing, and it helps you see beneath the surface. I cannot tell you, we've done several episodes on dealing with conflict. This is one of the key tools to be able to deal with conflict better. Most of the time, people get caught on hooking into the surface level issues, and they never resolve those underlying currents. So by learning how to do this process observation, you really do get below the surface to start resolving the roots of conflict and building that better connection, greater intimacy, because you're getting more into deeper feelings and meaning. And that can lead the path to more connection, which is kind of why we started this whole series on Edgar Schein's work. So to wrap it up, it's developing the humility and the patience to really sit in that space of not knowing, and so that you can really cultivate the curiosity that you need to develop this personal mastery competency. Karen, is there anything else that you want to add?
Other than saying the fact, I love when you say sitting in that space of unknowing, because we, in our ego, we're always wanting to know, or want to help somebody. And it's really sitting in that space. And what's interesting about this fact that awareness, think about awareness alone can transform how we connect with one another. Curiosity, awareness, asking the inquiry questions. So I'd love to encourage everyone who is on this podcast. Even that's why I want you to share it with others, because this is just an amazing practice for this time in this world, especially, right? When everyone listening can experiment with these inquiry approaches and see what unfolds. We'd love to hear more about how these practices are unfolding for you. If you have any questions, so share your experiences or questions in the comments below, or send us via our email. But I'm just so excited for you to experience what Christine and I have experienced regarding using inquiry as a way to deepen relationships and connections.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. And until next time, stay kind and stay curious. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.